The problem child has done it again. Whether you love him or hate him, one thing's for sure, Jake Paul is making waves in the boxing world. His most recent conquest is UFC legend Anderson Silva, but his performance has fans divided. So why are there still big question marks over Jake Paul's skills? And how did Uriah Hall put a stop to Le'Veon Bell's short-lived boxing career? Stay tuned for all of that and more coming right up. Killing the Spider. While Jake Paul didn't get a knockout as he did against Tyron Woodley or Ben Askren, his win over Anderson Silva was just as momentous. He went head-to-head with one of the best strikers in MMA history, but that didn't stop Jake Paul from outboxing him and extending his win streak to 6 in a row. The Spider admitted that he made some stupid strategic decisions throughout the fight, and in particular that he wasn't good with his balance. Silva was congratulatory towards Paul, but said that the scorecards were unanimous in handing the victory to Paul, and a late knockdown in the 8th round helped convince doubters he is truly the real deal. At 25 years old, the former YouTuber could have a long history in boxing ahead of him. He made his professional boxing debut against Deji Olatunji, the younger brother of longtime rival KSI, and only moved up. Nate Robinson, Ben Askren, and Tyron Woodley were next to fall short of stopping Paul's career before beating Anderson Silva. What Jake has done well is monetize his critics. Just like when Conor McGregor stepped into the ring, many boxing fans were hoping for Jake's downfall and couldn't help tuning in. This has generated millions for him, and he pocketed an estimated $5 million in his most recent fight. Not bad for a guy who's 25 years old. Next, some fans are still doubting. Many fight fans simply cannot believe some of Jake Paul's results. When he outlasted Tyron Woodley in their first matchup, fans pointed to a moment where Woodley seemed to hold back on the potential knockout blow. Now there is a similar speculation about his win over Silva. The most shared part of the fight is Paul's knockdown of Silva in the final round. Silva had definitely won a few rounds earlier, but the knockdown seemed to seal the deal for Paul. Now on social media, footage has been circulating that looks a little suspicious. From a certain camera angle, it doesn't actually look like Paul's punch connected. It might be fun for conspiracy theorists and those intent on bringing Paul down, but different camera angles leave no doubt. That punch definitely landed, and it landed clearly. It's no surprise it sent the Brazilian to the canvas, but speculation seems to follow Paul everywhere. Even after he knocked down Tyron Woodley, some theorized that he had given Woodley a signal moments earlier. Paul thinks that what he's already managed in 2 years of boxing is unheard of, and that fans don't give him enough credit. Still, after beating Silva, the first fighter he called out was Nate Diaz, who isn't exactly known as a boxer. Is Jake really starting a union? Silva and Paul made a bet before fighting, and now it's time to pay up. The wager wasn't money though. Instead, Jake wants Silva to lend his support for a fighters union that would combine MMA and boxing athletes, and it's all aimed at one organization. Since entering combat sports, Paul has had a lot of problems with the UFC. The organization that has carved out a monopoly in MMA has been targeted by Paul for not paying their fighters enough. The campaign has earned support from both ex and current fighters who are seeing the kind of money floating around in boxing and want to get in on the action. And it's no secret that Dana White has been in Jake Paul's crosshairs for a while. In fact, he even made a diss track about the UFC president. And in a back and forth, Paul is now making his biggest move yet. He is planning to form a United Fighters Association, and Anderson Silva looks set to be his first big supporter. Jake has invited other legends like Georges St-Pierre and even Nate Diaz to join him in this effort. Even veterans of the sport have admitted that UFC's contracts can be restricting and unfair for the fighters. And Paul says that Dana White hates him because he is exposing and disrupting the UFC's business. And the public is starting to get behind the idea of a fighters union too. It has been described as a movement that could change the MMA world forever. Regardless of his motives, if Paul brings about a real change in how fighters are treated, he could leave a lasting impact on the sports world. Up next, how did Uriah Hall give Le'Veon Bell a rude awakening? And why is Eddie Hearn suing Jake Paul for $100 million? So don't go anywhere. Uriah versus Ball. Former footballers haven't had much success stepping into the boxing ring, but after Le'Veon Bell knocked out Adrian Peterson in his boxing debut, it looked like he might break the curse. Unfortunately, he accepted Uriah Hall as his next opponent. Hall was one of the heaviest hitting middleweights during his time at the UFC, and it looks like at age 38, he still hasn't lost it. Hall slugged it out with Bell for 4 rounds, with Hall doing most of the slugging. He had a clear measure of his opponent, and the judges were unanimous in handing the win to Hall. Before the fight, Le'Veon Bell was convinced that this fight might be the start of his journey toward a world championship belt. He said that in order to climb that mountain, he would have to go through some of the toughest fighters on the planet, and Uriah Hall was near the top of that list. Hall only announced his retirement from MMA a few months ago after his loss to Andre Muniz at UFC 276. But once a fighter, always a fighter, and when he was offered a place to take part in Jake Paul's event, he jumped, and Hall gave the newbie Bell a lot of respect for how he handled the shots. He avoided getting knocked out and landed a few shots of his own, but it was clear who the professional fighter was. All of this switching between sports is getting confusing. Can't people just stick to one sport? Then again, with the amount of money being made from just a few rounds of boxing, it's easy to understand why. Next, Paul is confident with his lawyers. Boxing is big business, and nobody knows that better than British promoter Eddie Hearn. The Matchroom Boxing CEO is one of the biggest names in the sport, managing titans like Anthony Joshua and Canelo Alvarez. But he's going to battle himself against Jake Paul with a massive lawsuit. Hearn and Paul collaborated to bring Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano together in a huge moment for women's boxing. The lawsuit is seeking $100 million worth of damages from Paul for comments made about his company Matchroom Boxing. Earlier in the year, Paul suggested that the judges had been paid off by the company after two controversial decisions, both involving one judge, Glenn Feldman. Jake thought the first one was in Serrano's fight against Taylor, and the second example was where Anthony Joshua was awarded the win over Alexander Usyk. I mean, did this judge even see that fight? And the damage that Eddie Hearn thinks has been done to the company's brand is big. His lawyer accused Paul of making defamatory lies and refused the opportunity to retract the statements. Meanwhile, Jake Paul doesn't seem to be fazed at all. In the build-up to his fight against Anderson Silva, he was questioned about the case and said that he doesn't really even put any thought into it. He went on to reveal that he gets sued all the time for stupid stuff and that his record was 5-0 in the courtroom. Whoever Jake's lawyer is needs a raise. Jake has bigger fish to fry. Who is next for Jake Paul? That's the big question. He seems to be pulling MMA fighters out of retirement left, right, and center, but he wants the big money, so he'll have to catch a bigger fish. And there's none bigger than Conor McGregor. Ric Flair thinks that the matchup is actually in the realm of possibility, despite McGregor shrugging off the idea. Paul and McGregor have gone back and forth on social media, and as the former YouTuber continues to build up wins, a case is growing for the Notorious to give him the time of day. Flair, who is known as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, thinks that Jake Paul could handle someone like McGregor, and Paul has upped the ante, accusing McGregor of having a selfish career that didn't help his fellow fighters. Meanwhile, Paul is trying to get a union going to increase fighter pay. McGregor is still a global superstar and would likely need a big check to even consider stepping in the ring with Paul, but he has lost a lot of respect in the MMA community and doesn't look anywhere near challenging for the lightweight title, so it might be his best option if he wants to keep fighting. Did Jake Paul surprise you by beating Anderson Silva, and who do you think he should fight next? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again at the next one.